Well, good morning. Okay, my name is Babs Garcia. I am comfortable with she, her, and they, them pronouns. And I'm coming to you and speaking with you today. I'm currently the member of the, I keep hearing there's like a hum, and I'm sorry, I'm trying not to be distracted, but brains, if you get distracted. Okay, yeah, actually it is, thank you. Okay, I'm currently the membership committee chairperson. I serve occasionally as a volunteer in various capacities, occasionally service leader. Every now and then I say yes to writing a service message and volunteer greeter. And once upon a time, I was the president of the board. So I've been spending some time recently thinking about how I would address the fifth principle with you all today. So the fifth principle, as we know, is the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process in our congregations and in society at large. And maybe it's because I've been tackling a lot of work-related stuff outside of the UU recently. I couldn't help but like merge this discussion with the challenges that happen within my work life when I think about like handling and tackling difficult questions and how we make decisions and move forward with how we do that, you know, at the UU. So what does this look like in my business space versus what that looks like when we are upholding the fifth principle within the UU in this church space? So a little bit of background then. So what I do in my work life, I am an environmental consultant. I manage environmental cleanup at federally regulated contaminated facilities. So as a geologist, which is my academic background, and because I'm a little bit of a nerd, and I think some of y'all are too, let me just talk about that for a second, because I mean, it is kind of fun and interesting. From a technical perspective, the work that I do, you know, as a geologist revolves around understanding how contamination moves within the substrate. So you've got historical industrial facilities, and there's contamination there because, you know, back in the day, they just dumped things in the back 40. And we want to understand how that contamination could leave a facility. You know, how does it migrate within the subsurface? How does it move within the, if it's in the soil column or within the groundwater? And particularly of interest to us around here is how does contamination leave a site when it enters into the bedrock? So you all have heard the word karst thrown around for Missouri. So think caves, sinkholes, springs. So it's those secondary porosity features where contamination could get into and move. And I mean, that's, you know, a dynamic and challenging a problem. And it's very interesting from a hydrogeologic standpoint. Unfortunately, I don't get to wear my geologist hat all the time because of my natural propensities to want to just get in and figure things out and tell people what to do, just being honest. What I do actually more often than anything is, you know, I'm in project management, more to my day-to-day. And as a project manager, what I do a lot of is work with clients and work with regulators and other technical experts and contractors really from around the country to get an overarching, get alignment on our overarching cleanup goals. So that's understanding our remedial objectives, like what are we ultimately trying to do? And we need to figure out what we call a site conceptual model. That's essentially, you know, where is the contamination and where is it going? And really who's at risk. So in our world, I might call that, I need to know the nature and the extent of the contamination, and I need to understand the risks, evaluate those risks, and understand what those exposures to people might be. So as that project manager, you know, I oversee teams of folks in Springfield, Kansas City, and in St. Louis, where facilities like this are located. And we need to implement that chosen remedial method or that cleanup method. And the overarching objective for these projects is, if you want to just put it as simply as you can, you know, the protection of human health and the environment. So, I mean, that is a lot of extra words, but what that boils down to is that, I've been thinking for years as I've been growing within my professional world and worn hats, various hats here at the UU. I've been wondering how I could use that model for project management that I use at work. Like, how is that even applicable for life here at the UU? And I thought, like, hey, these are like separate, in the workspace, we're task oriented. I mean, this is a business, people. It's for profit, even though I work with regulators, I'm not in the public sector. And when I think about work at the UU, I think about how, we're people oriented and there's like a different approach. And I've also, conversely thought about how could I use those principles of the UU within my work life. I don't want to show up at work and not be a Unitarian Universalist. I don't want to show up and not carry those principles that I'm saying I espouse and believe on a Sunday morning. So the melding of the two. So in thinking about the blending of the two topics, the principles of the UU and specifically environmental regulations, I have previously operated under a false dichotomy of sorts. Because really and when it comes to like the work of what we need to do, it's very simple and it's the same across both realms. We are interested in getting results and working with people for the good of a common mission, whether that is a mission or a project, issue statement or what am I trying to say? Data quality objective statement. It's the same across the two. So I think I was thinking about the democratic process. I'm like, well, wait a minute. We don't use the democratic process at work. Thinking about, again, the fifth principle, we're not using the democratic process at work. I mean, where are decisions made at a place of business? They're made by the owners. They're made in boardrooms or informed by outside forces or industry experts and economic forecasts. Ultimately, the bottom line. And here at the UU, when we're uplifting the fifth principle, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process, who makes the decisions at the UU and why? Well, okay, so members, so it's analogous to our owners. We start in committees maybe, but ultimately in boardrooms, some decisions are made. We're trying to see what that would look like to expand it further, but we have the same outside influences. There's social forces at play that help guide our decisions, and we are supported by our UUA liaisons. Those are the experts. And with considerations always, no matter what, at any level, of what are the financial limitations. I mean, if we were playing a thought experiment of what could we do to fulfill our mission, the sky's the limit if you don't have to worry about money. And we all know we do. So those are the same. They're the same considerations across the board. So just like any organization, a project team operates under the overarching purpose statement. It's a mission by any other name. And that mission shares with the world, like, why do I exist? Why am I even here? And we, to fulfill that mission, do any number of activities or projects. So me and my team at work, my colleagues and my clients, we have some complicated decisions to make based on a variety of factors. And then we work together to implement those and move the project forward. The why that we're doing this, simply put, is in accordance with the highest law of the land, the reason for any environmental regulations or environmental actions, and that's the Environmental Protection Agency's foundational charge for the protection of human health and the environment. The Unitarian Universalist first principle itself is mirrored in that fundamental environmental protection tenet. The protection of human health and the environment is foundational because human life has inherent worth and health is dignity. I was thinking about not including this, but I'm like, actually, there's several other of these tenets that are like, they track. So the environmental laws exist because of the interconnectedness of which we all are a part. So the 8th principle, seventh principle, because I know my numbers. The 7th principle. Pollution, okay, so the interconnectedness there. Think pollution knows no borders. How about the saying, we're all downstream of something? So another one that comes to mind about our principles and how they're mirrored in other noteworthy environmental policies or initiatives. Our 5th and 6th principles are invoked when we consider injustices and inequalities, environmental protections in marginalized communities. So environmental justice issues. The environmental justice issues where we are challenged to, challenge us in our 6th principle, that state that we strive for, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. But the goal of environmental justice will only be achieved when everyone has and shares the same degree of environmental protection from environmental and health effects. So regardless of race, income level, where you live, you should have the same opportunities to live and work and learn in that safe space. So we are truly uplifting the values of the 5th principle there, because we have to say that everyone has to have access to the decision-making to get to that place. You can't have someone who lives in New Jersey making a decision for a community in rural Montana about what's best for their community, particularly when environmental justice issues are at play. Everyone has to have a voice. So I am starting to see through the course of this work the error in my ways and previously over compartmentalizing my work life and my church life and how it comes to addressing the challenges that we face. So let's talk a little bit about that overarching organizational mission. So, every week when we're here, we hear in the announcements the saying, the mission of the church is what it's called to do and the way it transforms lives. Well, technically that's true. Our mission, though, as it's written, says a little bit more, but to the same end. Guided by the UUA principles and purposes, our mission is to live in harmony with each other and nature, and to act with peace, compassion, and justice for all. This is the reason for us to exist. And as a church made up of a bunch of individuals, we need the constraining influence of that mission to get on the same page. That means we're not starting from scratch every time we have a new question or we're faced with a new challenge. The principles and the purposes should be our guide, and they should carry a lot of the weight. Our decisions, our challenge really then comes to the discernment of what that actually looks like, like the devil's in the details, but that is the challenge. I mean, it's how we do what our mission and our principles call us to do. So when I think about what that looks like in my environmental projects, the how that follows from that overarching charge of protection of human health and the environment, I mean, it really can be a dizzying melange of state and local and federal regulations and permits and consent orders, agreements, contracts. I mean, it's a lofty charge. And there's also innumerable public relations or outside interests that could be need to be taken into consideration to some effect. So what's best for a property owner, what's best for a local stakeholder, what's best for a client, how much will it cost, how much time do you have, what's the most expedient action? I mean, just to name a few of the really common ones. So navigating the complex challenges with a multitude of possible and sometimes seemingly mutually exclusive objectives, and sometimes some expectations that are mutually exclusive. I mean, that is a perennial challenge, not just in the project management world for us here. We all have a lot of interests, and sometimes our interests collide. But before we can tackle these seemingly intractable, complex issues, we have to start with the basics. In the environmental consulting world, that comes down to mitigate and immediately address imminent threat to human health and the environment. And then you can identify what needs to be done under the various, regulatory framework, and then implement. It's oversimplified, but really, you got to do what you have to do first. Start with number one, and then go from there. So in much of the same way, society at large and our church have the same challenges. We face seemingly intractable challenges. Maybe even existential challenges. So even before us now, as we have these biggest challenges of our times, we're talking about in the UU space, balancing advocacy with action, navigating untold trauma from the pandemic, dismantling racism and other oppressions within ourselves and in our institutions. There are lofty challenges out there. But as a church, in this church specifically, we also face some very, very unique challenges to us, is that we don't have a president on the board. We don't have a vice president, and we don't have a financial secretary. We're working with what Colleen called back in her presentation in May, an anemic board structure. One way to fit it. So because no one accepted these nominations back in November, Colleen, our former board president, had an opportunity to share maybe a different approach for navigating what leadership looks like. And she proposed that we consider a governance structure that's called, that's a shared governance structure called Sociocracy. You might see it sometimes referred to as dynamic governance. Now, Sociocracy is defined as a system of governance that seeks to create psychologically safe environments and productive organizations. And the distinction there is that it's different than just majority voting, because we're trying to build consent rather than just going with majority rule, as AJ helped illustrate in the story earlier. The discussions are made by the people who are involved, and it's inviting the decision makers to be the people who have that shared objective, who are in it. So since last year, we have engaged in conversations about sociocracy, and obviously we've already used it a little, we're using the method even as we're talking about what it looks like to integrate the method into our, say, future bylaw and other adoption or other primary document edits. So it kind of, I was going to say, like, talk about like going meta, and then I was like, I don't know if everyone knows what that means, but like talk about flying the plane and building it while you're in air. That's kind of what that looks like. But we're doing it, and we're figuring it out as we go. And actually, that's the best part. So sociocracy upholds two fundamental principles. I want to share those: organizational effectiveness and achieving an aim or purpose. So it's goal oriented. It's not unlike what I was thinking of, people oriented versus task oriented. No, it's still very much, we have an objective and we want to be successful in reaching it. But importantly, it emphasizes the principle of the equality of the members. So we're honoring everyone's voice. No one is silenced, no one is ignored, no one is oppressed, and no one holds power over another. So we have some big complex issues to tackle as a congregation, and we need to discern together what issues that we need to start to work on to move forward. And one way that we started to do that is back in late last year, a group of committee chairs and board members that we have got together and drafted the following statement in response to that challenge of not having our board positions filled, and wondering, how do we move forward to do the work of this church if we don't have this basic governance structure that we had become so used to? So what was written? Because we have a leadership structure that demands much of individuals in terms of time and pressure, we have no nominee for president, vice president, and financial secretary, leading to anxiety about the future of First UU. Therefore, We need a revisioning of the leadership structure to move the congregation forward. You know, just naming that is huge. We eventually need to get to a solution. It offers an option towards a solution, but it doesn't name exactly what that is. It lets it sit there for the congregation to know. Then it's appropriate. Let's set it up. But here, we're all sitting with this question and sitting with the challenge. Now, I have to say, I cringe a little about not having an immediate solution. And that's because of those hats that I wear in the professional world, where I think, oh, we got a problem. Okay, let's fix that. We got to get on it, like right now, because it's tactical. It's immediate. Here's a technical problem. Let's get a technical solution and let's move forward. And I know as a personal style that means sometimes I've been like, okay, I got this. Let's go. And then I start making decisions, and I just want everyone to, you know, get in line. It's kind of gross to say that out loud. But it's true that some people might be more inclined just to stand up and say, okay, follow me, let's do this. And leadership in this, that's great. I want to encourage that. But I also recognize that we have to, and we will get a better solution when it's not just one person out there saying, this is the plan, let's do it. We're going to get a better decision ultimately when we have that consensus building opportunity and when we all come together and other and diverse ideas are shared. Because as smart as I think I am sometimes in a decision, turns out I don't know everything. I know, shocking. So anyway, but someday we are going to visit in more depth what revisions to the bylaws might look like. And we have some opportunities now as we go. We will continue to use that sociocratic method of consensus building, even as we're going through and navigating these changes. As we continue to learn more about and use portions of that method, we get a little bit more comfortable with what that means to make room at the table, to scoot over and make room and ask for the diversity of input, not just from the few people who are willing and able and repeatedly show up to volunteer or say that they're going to help do the thing. So I'm actually reminded, I really like this. Back in May, Colleen's presentation or message, it was called Honeybee Democracy, What Nature Says About Church Governance. And in that message, Colleen shared a video of Cornell biology professor, Dr. Thomas Seeley, when he shared his thoughts about how bees work together to make decisions. And she shared the implications for us as humans as we move from an individualism or individualistic way of thinking into more collective or collaborative ways of living and making decisions together. The 4 guidelines that were shared, then I will repeat them here, but I would say this message is available in its entirety on the church website, and you should check it out if you're interested. But the guidelines are: 1, remind ourselves of our shared interest and foster mutual respect. 2, explore diverse solutions to problems at hand to maximize the likelihood of uncovering excellent solutions. 3, minimize a single leader's influence on group thinking. And 4, balance interdependence with independence. So maybe I was inspired by the wisdom of the honeybee, which Colleen spoke of in her message, on how we are invited to see and what wisdom we can from the way that bees behave to make decisions. Because there are some crossover concepts between managing those environmental projects and the teams, environmental projects and teams, and the tenets of sociocracy and leadership within our UU world. So 1, in the environmental consulting world, our success is built upon or broken on the effectiveness of our communications with each other, with our team. In this way, we can work together to do a multitude of small tasks that are needed. And if we are overwhelmed in terms of time and pressure, we are less effective, and ultimately the mission suffers. Previous leadership structures at the UU were found to demand too much of our leaders as individuals. And as a result of that, we had a lack of volunteers for taking on those roles of church leadership. The collaborative working as a team, we recognize will help us build us out all as leaders, so that not one person or one small group of individuals is carrying that burden disproportionately. So 2, there's no complex problem that can't be made more manageable by tackling the fundamental portions first and then taking the next right step. You can't solve the highest level questions first. Start with the simple requirements and go from there. I'm thinking about in the project world, how if I started every day thinking about how are we going to build this grand strategy, I would get overwhelmed. And before I know it, it's the end of the day and I've eaten like a bag of Lay's and 4 candy bars and I'm stressed and I haven't actually done any of the small things that needed to be done. So there's value as a church that we recognize the need to stick to the basics. Sometimes you got to keep your head down and just get by because that's where we're at. But that makes space for holding that question makes space for, we will get to the big issues. We will tackle those seemingly intractable issues and imperfectly, and we will tackle them in the way that we can. We're not forgetting about those, but we're also not letting ourselves be overwhelmed by the enormity of the challenges before us. And the third idea I had here was in thinking about the 5th principle and how I manage teams and people in the past, both here and at work, I am called to re-examine my tendency to quickly and unilaterally make decisions for the team, or to overly rely on a few like subject matter experts. So I applaud all of us for refraining, all of us and myself. I applaud myself for refraining from trying to fix that problem for the UU. Yeah, right, you're welcome. But honestly, like it's hard not to want to jump in and rescue and just one person say, let's just do it the way we've always done it because it's for the sake of expediency. Because it's a scary place to be a church and not have a functioning full board. I mean, I don't know if y'all are sitting with that tension, but that's not an ideal place to be. But by sitting with that, we had the opportunity to come up with some new solutions. Something's amiss here. We need to maybe rethink how we're doing this. So I applaud us for that. And I also know that tension is what helps us to ask some questions and invite some new voices in. So I'm walking away from this with a resolve, knowing that problems can't be solved by forcing solutions or even by inviting, like I said, the experts to the table. The best solutions are found when every team member has an integral part of the decision-making process. When we engage in the consensus building as an integral part of the process. So despite the challenges that we face, we do continue to operate under our current bylaws. We're doing good. We're here on Sunday. Things are advancing. We're doing amazing things with our technology. We're reaching members of our community. We're doing good work. And those successes, I don't want to undermine those. But we are now, as we are implementing these portions of the dynamic governance process, and we're seeing how that works, we are able to continue to do the work of the church. But right now we're focused on, we're using our guiding principles to make those decisions. And that's sufficient at this time. We are guided by our mission, we are accountable to each other, and we are making decisions that are pursuant to our principles. We can all share that part of our mission to help us build consensus. I encourage us all to reflect on the ways that we participate in that democratic process here. So what does that look like to actively engage in the democratic process within our church? So we have experiences that are varied, and I'm sure individuals here are going to be coming from their own professional life, and I am excited to hear what reflections they may bring to the table as we navigate some of these changes. So ultimately, I want to say that I know that there's some complex issues, but we can start and continue to work by keeping some things fairly simple. We're going to speak up, we're going to show up, and we're going to scoot over and make the circle a little bit wider. Thank you.